All right. So what should you learn in Flutter to become a full stack mobile app developer? This is one of the questions I'm getting asked quite often, actually. And I think most of the people actually get it wrong because they think they need to rehearse, they need to learn every widget, and they need to understand 100% what kind of how the widgets work, etc. And I think they're focusing too much on one specific part of the programming journey, but not on all of them. So this is a little anecdote here. I had a programmer which was young. I thought he is also able to learn quickly, and he worked for me like I think 2 months and the problem here really was he was good in his part. He was a good Flutter developer, yet he knew a lot of widgets. But when it came to Flutter architecture, to state managing, how to implement networking, he had like no clue. And this is really a big problem because most of the time you will be writing widgets and you will be adjusting UI. But you will sooner or later, your entire app will collapse and will not be maintainable anymore if you only focus on widgets, because you need to have a clean architecture. You need to have a state management, a good networking, and a good testing structure. You need to be able to debug your app. And if you're not able to do this, like your app will not succeed within a day. So you will be able to write your app within 1 month. I promise you this, because I've done it also this way. But you will have a hell of a time to maintain the app and to add new features to it. And I learned by the hard way, so you can trust me on this. I lost quite a lot of time because I had to write one app like 3 times to really become the best practice, or to really adhere to the best practices currently with which we have in Flutter and Dart. So yeah, let's quickly, so this is my little story. Let's talk a little bit of what I mean with the points here. Widgets, yeah. So what kind of widgets do we have? You don't have to learn all of them. What I would recommend you is you should learn them on your way. So you have your UI in mind. And this is the best way to firstly learn a new language or a new framework, is to have a small app, a small UI in mind. And then you start, okay, what kind of widgets do we need? What kind of widgets does the Flutter framework have for me, which I can use to implement? So you don't have to learn all of them. You only have to learn those which you actually need. And this is also a big problem. Some people stop learning what kind of widgets there are on the market. So I know like 100 widgets, this is all. So now I will write everything with this 100 widgets, which is possible actually, but not recommended. If you, there's so many widgets out there which you can use for specific use cases. So always keep your mind open is my recommendation here. You don't have to, as I already mentioned, learn them, and you don't have to remind them. The best way really is to search for them and knowing that they are widgets, specific widget for this use case, and then you simply just can Google it or search for it within the internet and then find the widgets you need. So yeah, don't focus 100% on widgets, but yeah, also be considerate if there are widgets, or yeah. The other thing which is really important is Flutter architecture. And now this is the big question, what do I mean with Flutter architecture? Flutter architecture actually composes in multiple parts. So Flutter architecture firstly is how do you structure your files, for example. So you have a file structure, and it's really important that you structure this accordingly, how you have it in mind. So you can, of course, and this is what I saw within projects of clients who asked me if I could maintain their app, which another developer messed up. You can have no file system. You can have all within one file, or you can have like a file with 1,000 lines of code. You can do this, of course. This is possible, but you will not be able to maintain your app. You will not be able to update it. So having a stable and good Flutter architecture and file system in this case is really good, is really key. The second thing, what I mean with Flutter architecture is how do you, which kind of approach do you take to separate your views, your models, and your view models. And there are multiple ways you can use MVVM, you can use MVC, MVP. You can use multiple approaches. I myself use most of the time MVVM, model view model approach. If you want to know more about this, I can also, after my presentation, give Amir some links to learn what those specific architectures are, what they mean. To sum it up, actually, it's pretty easy. Within development, you always want to separate. You always want to adhere to the principle separation of concerns. What this means? What does this mean? You don't want to have logic within your UI, and the reason for this one is, firstly, you want to be able to debug it, and it is easier to debug if you know specifically, okay, this problem is within the UI. This means this must be a UI problem. This is not a logic problem. And if you have a problem, if you have a bug, for example, with your view model, which is changing the UI, then you know, okay, this problem is within this file, within a view model. This means I have to search up there what is going wrong. So you're separating, so it's easier to separate, it's easier to debug first your code. And secondly, it's easier to reuse it actually. So if you have a UI, let's assume you only have a screen, a black screen with your name on it, which is standard. You have one view model, and this view model is changing the name actually. But the cool thing here is, if you have another screen which is actually having a really similar design, really similar logic, you are able to reuse this provider. For example, if you're using provider or this view model in more abstract terms, you're able to reuse this view model within another screen, for example. So, separating those two components actually give you the flexibility to reuse the UI and to reuse the logic view model in this case. There are now, so I gotta be honest here, this is currently a point of discussion within the Flutter community. There are some people who are actually talking, okay, actually there is not a really huge benefit in doing this. Most of the time I see people doing it and actually liking it and having really large scale project. But just to be fair, I want to give you the whole story here. It is a point of discussion. I prefer it if it's separated. Some people say it's nonsense, but yeah, I prefer it if the view is separated from view model and the view model is separated from the models. And what do I mean with models? I mean the business logic, like networking, like accessing some kind of packages, doing some complex logic. You should be separating this also from the view models. Because then you are firstly able to reuse it, and secondly, you are able to test it, and you are able to better debug it. We will come to the testing part soon down the line here, but yeah, just so you know. All right, so state management. This is a really big topic within Flutter. Actually, it's actually a really big topic within, I think, within React as well, but there are less. I think we've got within React Redux, if I'm not wrong, or MobX.
Yes,
but yeah, and in Flutter, this is really a big point, because state management, you can actually use multiple frameworks, or you can write your own framework and to maintain your state. So there are multiple ways you can have explicit state management, which is actually simply just calling set state. And whenever you do have any changes, you simply just call set state within the UI. This is how you start learning Flutter. If you have large-scaled apps which need to be maintained, which need to be maintainable, and which are really have a large code base, it is best practice to not use that state anymore. Most of the time, there are like 2% cases where you are allowed to do this, but most of the time you should not do this using set state. You should have a specific provider for a screen, and the provider is doing the set stating, so the notify listener in this case most of the time. There are multiple state management methods. You can use provider, which is currently the easiest one. Yet also currently I think provider is one of the the easiest, but also the most inflexible one, because with provider you are able to fast integrate providers for your specific UI. But the problem here really is you always need a context for it. And this is really burdensome if you, for example, want to merge providers. And then, yeah, of course, there are specific methods, proxy providers, which you can use, but they are also really, they take quite a lot of boilerplate, which actually should not be the case. You should be able to connect with different providers easier. And this is actually where Riverpod comes in. This is a new package from Remy Rousselet, who also is the author of Provider. Riverpod is actually solving all of these issues, so you don't have to have any kind of context anymore. The providers will be able to dispose themselves automatically if you allow them to do so. And yeah, Riverpod actually has all of the advantages of provider without the disadvantages. So I currently favor Riverpod. If you're really hardcore developer, which I suppose some of you maybe are, you can also check out Block. The Block is actually kind of cool now. Earlier, when I started in 2018, it was the recommended state management method from the Flutter team. But the problem here really was that it was like really, really difficult, and there was so much boilerplate always involved in it. So I tried it out. I didn't like it, so I switched to Provider. And after I noticed that Provider has its own weaknesses, for a large project, I switched to a Block again, and now I switched totally to Riverpod, which is a really awesome state management method. Just one thing, state management is really important. Don't take this lightly. I had like one application from an Indian developer, one application from a Pakistani developer. And one thing which really stood out was their bad state management technique. And it was not maintainable at all, because they were calling the network request within the UI, and they were calling once the network request has finished set state and rebuild the entire state. And so one funny case was rebuild the entire state, and this triggered again a new network request, which means it was like an infinity loop. And this most of the time really happens if you don't separate your data correctly. So I don't take it lightly, read into it, and really use state management depending on what you need. Provider, Riverpod, Block, Getix, there's so many. I would recommend you Riverpod. It has all of the advantages and really no disadvantages I know of.